Hey, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jennifer and I'll be narrating today's story. This is a piece of human written science fiction, so get comfortable and let's jump right in.
Coldest assassin in the sector cries when the human did this. Station Aethelgard sprawled across the void like a chrome-plated tumor, its neon arteries pulsing with the lifeblood of 1,000 species commerce. The station orbited the edge of the dead zone, a collapsing nebula that had swallowed 3 entire colonies and turned profitable trade routes into navigational nightmares. Only fools and desperates came here now. Luke Anderson qualified as both. Cries moved through the station's upper commercial district like smoke through a grate. Her reactive polymer armor shifted colors to match the holographic advertisements that screamed from every surface, making her little more than a shimmer in the corner of the eye. The bioluminescent cracks that spider-webbed across her deep purple skin were masked beneath a tactical hood, but she could feel them, a constant, low-grade burning that had been getting worse for the past 3 cycles. She'd been ignoring it. Assassins didn't take sick days. Her neural implant fed her a steady stream of data: target last seen in Sector 7G, probability of location at Bay 23, 87%, threat assessment, minimal, Luke Anderson, human. Freighter captain, no combat augmentation, no recorded military service, no corporate backing. A nobody with something very valuable locked in that primitive skull of his navigation data that would let the Vane Syndicate chart safe passage through the dead zone. Crisan's orders were simple: retrieve the data, retire the asset. She'd done this 1,000 times. This would be 1,001. The maintenance sublevel hummed with the baseline thrum of recyclers and air processors. Crisan deployed 3 cloaking drones, each one a marvel of Zixili engineering, capable of generating holographic decoys while simultaneously scanning for bioelectric signatures. Within seconds, they'd painted her a complete thermal map of the sublevel. 1 heat signature, human-sized, Bay 23, as predicted. Too easy. Crisan activated her neural scrambler, a short-range EMP burst designed to fry any nearby electronics and disorient organics with neural implants. She moved in, silent as vacuum, her weapon primed. The bay door was open. Inside, a rusted hulk of a freighter squatted on its landing struts like a tired beast. The rusty bucket lived up to its name. Crisan's tactical analysis flagged it as 60 years out of date, held together with spot welds and what appeared to be actual duct tape. The heat signature was beneath the ship near the starboard thruster. Crisan rounded the landing strut, and her foot caught something. The monofilament wire was invisible to her enhanced optics because it wasn't broadcasting any electromagnetic signature. It was just a wire. Physical, analog, ancient. The tension release triggered a pneumatic system, compressed air, not electronics, and suddenly the bay was filled with a blinding spray of coolant fog. Crisan's thermal vision whited out. Her neural implant screamed warnings, trying to compensate, but the fog was non-conductive, non-reactive, just actual physical vapor. "Shit," she hissed, the first word she'd spoken in 3 days. A pressure plate clicked beneath her left foot. Another pneumatic hiss, and a cargo net physical rope, woven fiber, dropped from the ceiling. Crisan was fast. She'd been engineered for speed on a high-gravity world where reflexes meant survival. She twisted, rolled, and the net caught only air. But her hood snagged on something, a low-hanging cable she couldn't see through the fog, and her tactical cloak tore free. The fog began to clear. "You know," said a voice from somewhere above her, "most folks nowadays don't look up. Everything's on screens and HUDs. Forgot how to use their actual eyes." Crisan snapped her gaze upward. Luke Anderson sat on a maintenance catwalk, his legs dangling over the edge. He was wiping his hands on a rag that might have once been white but was now the universal brown of old engine grease. He didn't look alarmed, he looked tired. "Luke Anderson," Crisan said, her weapon trained on his center mass. "I'm here for the navigation data. Surrender it and your death will be quick." Luke scratched his stubbled jaw. "That's a hell of an opening line. You practice that in a mirror, or does it just come natural?" Crisan's finger tightened on the trigger. The weapon clicked. Nothing happened. Luke held up a small device, chunky, crude, with actual toggle switches on its face. "Faraday cage generator, 60-year-old tech. Your smart gun can't handshake with your targeting implant through the interference. It's basically a fancy paperweight right now." Crisan dropped the weapon and lunged. If tech failed, she still had her body muscles honed on a world with twice Earth's gravity, reflexes that could catch a blade in flight. She made it 3 steps before her left leg buckled. The pain was instantaneous and total. The bioluminescent cracks across her face flared from their usual soft violet to a sickly neon green. Cries crashed to the deck, her neural implant flooding her system with damage reports that all screamed the same thing: catastrophic cellular degradation in progress. Through the haze of agony, she saw Luke climb down from the catwalk. He moved carefully, like a man walking through a minefield. "Stay back," she managed, trying to push herself up. Her right arm gave out. Luke crouched a safe distance away, his expression unreadable. He pulled out an ancient tablet, not a holographic interface, but an actual screen with physical buttons, and tapped at it for a moment. Then he looked at her, and something in his eyes changed. "Oh hell," he said quietly. "They really did it. The bastards really did it." "Did? What?" Cries gasped. The cracks were spreading now, new fissures of poisoned light crawling down her neck. Luke turned the tablet to show her. It displayed a biometric readout, her biometric readout pulled from the station's medical scanner network. There, highlighted in red, was a chemical compound she didn't recognize. "Necrovial," Luke read. "It's a termination protocol. Corporate types use it on assets they can't afford to have interrogated. Slow-acting cellular toxin. Once it reaches critical concentration, it triggers a cascade failure. Everything just shuts down." He looked at her with something that might have been pity. "How long have you been feeling sick?" 3 cycles. The burning, the fatigue she'd attributed to long missions. "You're dying," Luke said flatly. "And I'm betting your employers are the ones who poisoned you. Can't have a professional assassin spilling secrets if she gets caught, right? Better to make sure the evidence disposes of itself." The revelation hit Cries harder than the pain. She'd served the Vane Syndicate for 8 years. She'd eliminated their enemies, retrieved their assets, bled for them on a dozen worlds. She'd been their ghost. And they'd turned her into a suicide weapon without even telling her. "Why?" She tried to form the question, but her lungs felt like they were filling with broken glass. "Why tell you?" Luke stood up, running a hand through his graying hair. "Because you're about to die, and I figure everybody deserves to know who killed them." He started walking toward his ship. "Sorry about this. Seems like a shit way to go." Crisan's vision was fading. The green light from the cracks cast everything in a nightmarish glow. She could feel her organs failing one by one, liver, kidneys, neural pathways misfiring as the toxin ate through her synapses. She was a tool. Tools got discarded when they broke. The darkness was closing in when she felt hands grab her armor. "Oh, Luke's voice, frustrated and distant. "I'm going to regret this, aren't I?" Then the world tilted, and Cries knew nothing at all. Consciousness returned in pieces. First, sound the clank and hiss of machinery, then smell antiseptic and engine degreaser. Finally, sensation cold metal beneath her back, and something burning in her veins. Crisan's eyes snapped open. She was in a workshop that could charitably be called organized chaos. Tools hung from magnetic strips on the walls, parts bins overflowed with components she couldn't identify, and in the center of it all was Luke Anderson, elbow deep in her chest cavity. "Don't move," he said without looking up. "I've got about 6 tubes running through you right now, and if you rip one out, we get to start this whole thing over again." Cries looked down. He wasn't exaggerating. Transparent tubes ran from a jury-rigged pump. It looked like it had been salvaged from a freighter's coolant system directly into ports on her armor that were meant for biometric monitoring. The tubes glowed with a faintly luminescent fluid that definitely wasn't standard medical plasma. "What are you doing?" Her voice was a rasp. "Chemical wash," Luke said, finally glancing at her. His eyes were bloodshot, his face drawn with exhaustion. "That necrovial shit is designed to bond with your cellular structure and just keep replicating until there's nothing left. Can't stop it with conventional meds. By the time you got to a real doctor, you'd be dead." He tapped the pump. "But see, I work on freighters, old ones. The kind that use chemical coolant systems instead of smart fluid. And you know what eats through chemical bonds real good? Industrial solvent." Cries stared at him. "You're flushing me with industrial solvent?" "Diluted," Luke said defensively. "Real diluted. Mixed with saline, human adrenaline, caffeine. Basically, I'm running engine cleaner and coffee through your veins at a ratio that probably won't kill you." "Probably." He made an adjustment to the pump. "Your biology is close enough to human that the core metabolic processes are compatible." High gravity adaptation means you've got a naturally robust cardiovascular system, so you can handle the volume load. And the bioluminescent markers in your tissues are responding to the treatment C. They're fading from that death green back to purple. She looked at her hands. He was right. The cracks were still there, but the color was shifting back to its normal violet glow. Why? The question came out barely above a whisper. Luke sat back on a rolling stool, wiping his hands on that same omnipresent rag. Why am I saving you? You're my target. I was sent to kill you. Yeah, I figured that out when you tried to murder me, he shrugged. But you're not trying to kill me now, and the folks who sent you sure as hell tried to kill you. Enemy of my enemy and all that. That's not an answer. Luke was quiet for a moment, staring at the makeshift medical setup. I had a co-pilot once, good kid, smart. He got into some debt with a corporate loan outfit, nothing major, just bad luck and worse timing. They put a neural compliance chip in him as collateral. Said it was standard procedure, just insurance to make sure he'd pay up. His jaw tightened. 6 months later, he missed a payment by 3 days. The chip killed him, just like that. Middle of our flight, he seized up and died because some algorithm somewhere decided he was in default. Crisson said nothing. I pulled into the nearest station and handed the body over to corporate security. You know what they told me? Luke's voice was flat. They said I was lucky. Lucky, because if he'd been piloting during the seizure, the whole ship might have crashed. They thanked me for my understanding and offered me a 20-credit voucher for my inconvenience. He met her eyes. Your contract says you're an enemy. My eyes say you're a person getting screwed by the same kind of bastards who killed my friend, so I don't follow the contract. The pump hummed. The solvent mixture continued its slow circuit through Crisson's system, burning out the poison cell by cell. It hurt not the sharp agony of the necrovial, but a deep, purging ache that meant her body was fighting back. I don't understand you, Crisson said finally. Yeah, well. Luke stood up and checked the monitor's analog gauges with actual needles, tracking flow rate and pressure. I've been told I'm aggressively irrational. It's my defining characteristic. I was trained from childhood to eliminate targets efficiently. Every action optimized, every emotional response suppressed. You're supposed to be dead. I'm supposed to have completed my mission and moved on to the next contract. Her voice cracked slightly. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. Luke pulled up a second stool and sat down facing her. How about we start with not dying? Get that protocol flushed out of your system. Then we can worry about what comes next. The syndicate will send recovery teams. When I don't report in, let them come. Luke's expression hardened. I've been running from corporate goons, syndicate enforcers, and every other jackass who wants what's in my head for 3 years now. I'm pretty good at it by now. The navigation data, Crisson said. The dead zone coordinates. That's why they want you. That's why everyone wants me. He tapped his temple. It's all up here. No backups, no copies, because anything digital can be stolen. My old astrogation professor drilled that into me. The most secure data storage in the galaxy is a human brain that knows how to keep its mouth shut. And you won't sell it? Oh, I'd love to sell it. I'd be rich. But see, the thing about the dead zone is it's the only safe passage between the outer colonies and the core worlds now that the regular routes are collapsing. Whoever controls that route controls trade for 1/3 of known space. He shook his head. I give that to the syndicate. They'll turn it into a toll road and bleed every independent hauler dry. They'll monopolize it, weaponize it, and probably start a war over it. So no, I'm not selling. I'm just trying to survive long enough that maybe, someday, I can give it to someone who won't use it to screw over everyone else. Crisson processed this. The logic was impractical, sentimental, completely irrational by her training standards. It was also, she realized, the first genuinely selfless act she'd encountered in her entire career. You're going to die for this, she said quietly. Probably. Luke checked his watch, an actual mechanical watch with hands and gears. But not today. Today, we're both going to live. The pump cycled for another 4 hours. Luke stayed the entire time, monitoring the flow, adjusting the mixture when her vital signs fluctuated, and occasionally injecting additional compounds, magnesium, potassium, something he called industrial-grade electrolytes that smelled like synthetic citrus. Crisson drifted in and out of consciousness, always waking to find him there, methodically keeping her alive with nothing but primitive technology and stubborn determination. At one point, she asked, "What happens if this doesn't work?" Luke didn't sugarcoat it. Then the toxin wins, and you die. Probably takes me with you when the syndicate's cleanup crew arrives. Why risk it? He was quiet for a long moment. Because I looked at your file. You know what I found? 16 years of service, hundreds of missions, perfect success rate, and not a single personal record. No preferences logged, no vacation time taken, no medical leave except for combat injuries. You don't exist outside your missions. He looked at her, and his expression was something Krisan couldn't quite identify. Nobody should have to live like that. And nobody should die like a broken machine being thrown out. Something in Krisan's chest tightened, not the toxin, but something else, something she didn't have a protocol for. I don't, she started, then stopped. In my culture, we have a saying, Kesa viral than. It means efficiency is survival. Emotions are treated as design flaws to be corrected. I was selected for the assassin program because my neural profile showed minimal emotional response. I was perfect. Sounds lonely. The simple observation hit harder than it should have. Lonely. Krisan had never allowed herself to frame her existence in those terms. Loneliness implied a lack of something, and she'd been taught that she was complete unto herself, a weapon didn't need companionship. But sitting in this cluttered workshop, watching a human she'd been sent to murder work tirelessly to save her life with nothing but primitive technology and an inexplicable moral compass, Krisan felt something fundamental shift inside her. Yes, she said finally, it is. Luke smiled a small, tired expression. Well, welcome to the Rusty Bucket crew. We specialize in lonely, irrational, and aggressively obsolete. Despite everything, the pain, the betrayal, the existential crisis of having her entire worldview dismantled, Krisan felt the corners of her mouth twitch upward. It was the first time she'd smiled in 8 years. The solvent flush took 6 hours total. When Luke finally disconnected the tubes and helped Krisan sit up, her entire body felt like it had been wrung out and hung to dry. But she was alive. The bioluminescent cracks had faded to their original violet, and her biometric readings displayed on Luke's charmingly outdated tablet showed normal function across the board. Congratulations, Luke said, tossing her a bottle of water. You've survived being poisoned by your employers and treated by an unqualified freighter mechanic with a chemistry set. That's got to be worth something. Krisan caught the bottle. Her reflexes were slower than usual, but still functional, and drank. The water was recycled and tasted faintly metallic, but it was the most satisfying thing she'd experienced in days. How did you know this would work? I didn't, Luke shrugged. But I spent 20 years keeping ships running on the edge of nowhere with whatever parts I could scavenge. You learn to improvise. Biology's not that different from engineering when you get down to it. It's all just systems in chemistry. That's a terrible philosophy. Yeah, but you're alive, so maybe it's not that terrible. Krisan stood carefully, testing her legs. Stable. She looked around the workshop properly for the first time. Every surface was covered in tools, parts, and what appeared to be a complex array of security measures, all analog, all physical. Tripwires, pressure plates, old-fashioned cameras with actual film. Your security system, she said. It's deliberately primitive. Smart tech can be hacked, Luke replied, starting to clean up the medical equipment. But a wire stretched across a doorway? Can't hack physics. Can't remotely disable a mechanical lock. Can't EMP a spring-loaded trap, he grinned. Turns out the most advanced security in the galaxy is stuff my great-grandfather would recognize. It's inefficient. It kept me alive when the Syndicate's top assassin came calling. Krisan couldn't argue with that. What now? Luke's expression grew serious. Now we have a problem. You failed to report in. The Syndicate knows something went wrong. They're going to send a recovery team probably already en route. They'll sterilize this entire sector, Krisan said, her tactical training kicking in automatically. Standard protocol. Remove all evidence, eliminate any witnesses, recover or destroy any assets. That's what I figured. Luke walked to a wall panel and flipped a series of mechanical switches. A section of the floor slid open actual hydraulics, no computer control, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was an arsenal. I've got about 20 different groups who want me dead. I don't go anywhere without preparation. Krisan examined the weapons. They were an eclectic mix, some modern, some ancient, all meticulously maintained. You said you weren't military. I'm not. I'm just paranoid and well-traveled. He pulled out a heavy rifle, ballistic chemical propellant, the kind of weapon museums kept behind glass. Most folks nowadays use energy weapons. Plasma, lasers, magnetically accelerated projectiles, all very impressive. But you know what's great about bullets? They don't need a power source, they don't have electronic signatures, and they work in EM-shielded environments. He tossed her a handgun similarly archaic, but Krisan's training covered weapons from 1,000 cultures across 1,000 years. She checked the magazine. Chemical propellant rounds, armor-piercing tips. You really don't trust technology. I trust technology that can't betray me. Luke loaded his rifle with practiced efficiency. Everything else is just waiting for the right hacker or the right kill switch. A proximity alarm blared mechanical bells, triggered by motion sensors around the bay. Luke glanced at a wall of monitors showing feeds from his physical cameras. Speaking of betrayal. 6 figures in Syndicate tactical armor were moving through the station corridors, heading for Bay 23. They moved with the coordinated precision of a professional extraction team, 2 front, 2 rear, 2 on overwatch. Recovery team, Krisan confirmed. Class A tactical squad. They're here to clean up the mess. That mess being you and me. Correct. Luke checked his watch. Station security will conveniently not notice them. The Syndicate has half the station administration on payroll. All of them, Krisan corrected. Station Aethelgard is a Syndicate asset. That's why they chose it for the operation. Fantastic. Luke moved to a control panel and began flipping switches. Throughout the bay, mechanical locks engaged, blast doors started cycling, and various trap mechanisms armed themselves. Any tactical insights you'd like to share? Krisan studied the monitors. Her mind, freed from the fog of dying, slipped back into assassination mode angles, timing vulnerabilities. But this time, she wasn't planning an elimination. She was planning a defense. The team leader will be the one in the back right position, she said. Vane Syndicate Doctrine commanders direct from the rear. They'll breach from multiple angles simultaneously. Bay door, maintenance access, ventilation shafts. Can't hack the bay door, Luke said with satisfaction. Manual lock, 3-inch steel. They'll have to cut through or blast it. They'll blast it. Time is more valuable than stealth at this point. Good. Luke pulled out a remote detonator again, purely mechanical, connected to physical wires, because I've got the bay door wired with about 50 kilos of industrial explosive. Soon as they breach, you'll kill us all, Krisan interrupted, the explosion in an enclosed space. We'll vent through the maintenance access I just opened. Luke pointed to another monitor showing a freshly opened panel. Shaped charge principles. Pressure takes the path of least resistance. Krisan stared at him. You're insane. I'm thorough, he handed her the detonator. You know their tactics. You trigger it. The trust implicit in that gesture was staggering. Krisan had been trained to never trust anyone, to verify every alliance, to always maintain the position of advantage. Luke was handing her a device that could kill them both and trusting her to use it correctly. Why? She asked again, that same question that kept arising. Why trust me? Luke met her eyes. Because an hour ago, you could barely stand. I watched you fight your way back from death, and the first thing you did when you recovered wasn't try to kill me or run. You asked, what now? That tells me you're thinking like a person, not an asset, he smiled. Plus, you smiled earlier. People who can still smile aren't the ones I need to worry about. On the monitors, the recovery team reached the bay door. The leader, exactly where Krisan had predicted, gave a hand signal. 2 members moved forward with a breaching charge. How long do you need? Luke asked, hefting his rifle. Krisan calculated angles, blast radius, pressure differential. 3 seconds after breach. The charge will already be separating from the door. That's when we detonate. You sure? No, she gripped the detonator, but it's the optimal tactical window. Good enough for me. The breaching charge detonated with a dull thump that shook the bay. The door bulged inward, metal screaming, then blew apart in a shower of sparks and shrapnel. Krisan counted. 1, 2, 3. She pressed the detonator. The world became fire and pressure. Luke's shaped charge detonated perfectly, the blast channeling through the breached doorway and into the corridor beyond. The overpressure vented through the maintenance access like he'd calculated, turning the bay into a momentary wind tunnel rather than a death trap. When the smoke cleared, 3 of the recovery team were down, 1 dead, 2 incapacitated. The other 3 had taken cover in side corridors, out of the blast radius. Phase 1 complete, Luke said calmly. like he'd just finished a routine maintenance check. Phase 2. We make them think we're still in the bay while we actually leave through the cargo lift. He grabbed a pre-packed bag emergency supplies, Kristen guessed, and headed for a section of floor she'd thought was solid. He pressed a hidden lever, and a hatch opened, revealing a narrow shaft leading down. You planned all this in advance, Kristen said. I've been planning escape routes since I arrived. Luke gestured to the shaft. After you. Kristen dropped through, her training taking over. The shaft led to a cargo tunnel that connected to the station's freight system, a network of conveyor belts and transport tubes designed to move goods without cluttering the main corridors. It was dirty, cramped, and completely off the main sensor grid. Luke dropped down behind her and sealed the hatch. Above them, they could hear the recovery team breaching into the workshop, sweeping for targets that were no longer there. They'll figure it out eventually, Kristen said as they moved through the tunnel. Eventually doesn't matter, I just need 10 minutes. 10 minutes to what? Get to my ship and leave. They moved quickly through the freight tunnels, Luke navigating by memory and what appeared to be hand-drawn maps on actual paper. Twice they heard security patrols pass nearby, but the team was focused on the bay and the main corridors. The tunnels opened into a secondary hangar, smaller, dimly lit, filled with cargo containers and small maintenance craft. And there, sitting on a pad like a particularly ugly duckling, was the rusty bucket. She's beautiful, Luke said with obvious affection. She's a derelict, Kristen corrected. She's home. Luke ran to the boarding ramp and began his pre-flight sequence, which appeared to consist of hitting various parts of the ship with a wrench while checking manual gauges. Come on, baby, don't do this to me now. The ship coughed, shuddered, and rumbled to life. Black smoke belched from one thruster. Is that normal? Kristen asked, climbing aboard. Define normal. Behind them, the hangar's main doors began to open. The recovery team had found them. Kristen could see them advancing the remaining 3 members, now joined by reinforcements, 8 total. All heavily armed. We're not going to make it, she calculated aloud. Pre-flight takes 3 minutes minimum. They'll breach the ship in 2. Then I guess we'd better buy ourselves a minute. Luke tossed her his rifle and grabbed something from a wall locker, a massive, belt-fed machine gun that looked like it belonged in a planetary war. Not a personal firefight. What is that? Kristen demanded. M2 Browning, designed in 1918, Earth calendar. Still works. He hefted it to the top of the boarding ramp and braced it against his shoulder. Also very loud. Cover your ears. The machine gun roared. It was like being inside a thunderstorm. Spent casings rained down around Luke's feet as he swept the weapon across the advancing recovery team. Modern armor was designed to stop energy weapons and high-tech projectiles. A century-old machine gun firing half-inch bullets at supersonic velocity was apparently not in the threat database. 2 went down immediately. The others scattered, trying to find cover in a hangar designed for cargo, not combat. 60 seconds, Luke shouted over the gunfire. Get to the cockpit and start the navigation sequence. Manual controls, big red lever on the left. Kristen ran. The rusty bucket's interior was exactly as primitive as its exterior, suggested no holographic displays, no neural interfaces, just switches, levers, and gauges. She found the cockpit and the big red lever Luke had mentioned. She pulled it. The ship lurched. Something in the engine compartment made a sound like a dying whale. Don't worry about the noises, Luke called back. She always does that. Kristen strapped into the co-pilot's seat, actual physical straps, not inertial dampeners, and watched through the viewport as Luke emptied the machine gun's belt into the hangar. The recovery team was pinned, unable to advance without exposing themselves to the withering fire. Then the gun went silent, empty. Luke dropped it and sprinted for the cockpit. Go, go, go! Kristen had no idea how to pilot this ship. She grabbed the control stick, an actual physical stick connected to control surfaces by cables and hydraulics, and pulled. The rusty bucket lurched upward, scraping its belly on the hangar deck and sending sparks flying. Luke dove into the pilot's seat and took over, his hands flying across controls that looked like they'd been salvaged from a dozen different ships. Hang on, he shouted. The ship blasted through the hangar's atmosphere containment field designed to stop cargo, not entire ships, and out into open space. Station Ethelgard's defense grid lit up, targeting lasers, locking onto them. They're going to shoot us down, Kristen said. Probably. Luke was typing something into his ancient tablet, actual typing, with physical keys, but first they've got to hit us. He pulled back on the controls, and the rusty bucket performed a maneuver that Crissan's training identified as physically impossible for a ship of this mass. Except it worked. The defense lasers fired where the ship should have been. Luke had already zigged when the algorithms predicted he'd zag. He flew like he fought unpredictably, illogically, and with complete disregard for standard doctrine. He also flew them straight toward the dead zone. "That's a collapsing nebula," Crissan said, her tactical training screaming warnings. "Navigation through it is impossible without the coordinates I have memorized." Luke grinned, that same mad smile he'd worn while firing a 100-year-old machine gun. "Yeah, I know. That's why we're going in there, and they're not following. We'll die. We'll die if we stay here for sure. In there, we've got a chance." Crissan looked at the monitors. Syndicate ships were launching from the station, vectoring to intercept. Behind them, Station Ethelgard was shrinking. Ahead, the dead zone loomed a churning mass of gas and radiation, where space itself seemed to be tearing apart. She'd been trained her entire life to calculate odds, assess risks, choose the logical course of action. She looked at Luke, who was humming something off-key while steering towards certain death, with nothing but memorized numbers and faith in a ship held together by spite and spot welds. "I trust you," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. Luke glanced at her, his expression softening. "That's good, because I'm trusting you to watch the engine temperature gauge and tell me if it goes into the red. Can't watch everything at once." They plunged into the dead zone together. The dead zone was dying. That was the only way to describe it. The nebula that had once been a thriving stellar nursery was collapsing in on itself, pulled apart by the gravitational dance of two black holes slowly spiraling toward each other. The space between was a nightmare of radiation storms, gravity waves, and chunks of shattered planets caught in the maelstrom. It was also, if you knew exactly where to go and when, the only safe passage between two major sectors of inhabited space. "Temperature's rising," Crissan called out, watching the ancient needle gauge creep toward the red zone. The rusty bucket shuddered as it entered the nebula's outer edge, and every alarm in the ship began screaming a discordant symphony of mechanical bells and buzzing sirens. "That's normal," Luke shouted over the noise. He was focused on his navigation, one hand on the control stick, the other on a printed star chart covered in handwritten notes and calculations. "We're hitting the radiation belt. Should pass in 30 seconds. Should? 90% certain." The ship bucked as a gravity wave passed through, and something in the cargo hold broke free and crashed around. Crissan's combat training had prepared her for many things. Being in a spacecraft held together by determination and questionable engineering while flying through a collapsing nebula was not one of them. 15 seconds! Luke adjusted their course by pure instinct, making corrections that no computer could calculate because the environment was changing too fast for algorithms to model. He was flying by feel, by experience, by some ineffable sense of how the universe wanted to kill him at any given moment. The radiation cleared. The alarms quieted slightly from imminent death to merely probable disaster. "See?" Luke said, 90%. Through the viewport, the dead zone revealed its terrible beauty. Streamers of ionized gas painted space in shades of purple and gold. Chunks of stellar matter, some the size of mountains, some the size of continents, drifted in slow-motion ballet. In the distance, the twin black holes were visible as points of absolute darkness surrounded by accretion disks that glowed like angry eyes. Crissan struggled for words. In her entire career, she'd never seen anything like this. Beautiful. "First time I came through here, I thought the same thing," Luke said. "Right before a piece of planetoid the size of a city tried to crush me. Keep watching those sensors." These sensors are 40 years out of date, which means they're simple enough that the EM interference doesn't scramble them. Modern sensors would be useless in here, too much noise, too many false positives. But basic radar? That works just fine. Crissan watched the radar screen, a actual circular display with a sweeping line, like something from ancient maritime navigation. "Contact, bearing 270, range 50,000 kilometers. It's closing fast. That'll be the debris field. Hang on." Luke dove the rusty bucket into a steep descent, or at least what passed for descent in zero-gravity navigation. They plunged through a gap between two massive chunks of shattered planet, the clearance so tight Crissan could see the scarred surface of the planetoids through the viewport. "Too close," she called out. "Nope, just close enough." They cleared the gap with meters to spare. Behind them, on the radar, Chrisen saw new contacts, the Syndicate pursuit ships. They were following, but they didn't have Luke's navigation data. They were tracking the Rusty Bucket's trail, trying to follow its exact path. One of the Syndicate ships miscalculated the gap. It clipped the edge of a planetoid and spun off course, tumbling into the void. Its distress beacon activated, then cut out as it was crushed by a gravity wave. "They're going to keep following," Chrisen said. "Even if they lose ships, they'll keep coming." "I know." Luke's expression was grim. "That's why we're not just running, we're leading them somewhere." "Where?" "You'll see. About 3 minutes. Watch that temperature gauge." The needle was creeping toward red again. Whatever Luke was planning, the Rusty Bucket wasn't happy about it. The ship groaned and shuddered, its ancient hull protesting every maneuver. 2 minutes, Luke said. He was following his chart, making constant micro-corrections. The path was threading between gravity wells, using them for slingshot acceleration while avoiding being caught in their pull. It was a navigation problem that would take a supercomputer hours to calculate. Luke was doing it in real time with a chart and a calculator. "How did you find this route?" Chrisen asked. 3 years ago, I was running supplies to a research station on the edge of the nebula. They were studying the black holes, charting the gravity wells, trying to predict when the final collapse would happen. Luke's voice took on a distant quality. Station got wiped out when a stellar fragment hit them, but their data survived. I downloaded everything I could to my tablet, figures, charts, predictions. Spent 6 months analyzing it, testing routes, mapping safe passages. You did this yourself? Without a navigation AI? AIs are predictable. They find the optimal path, which means anyone with a similar AI can predict that path. Luke tapped his temple. But a human making intuitive leaps, following hunches, taking irrational shortcuts. That's harder to predict. That's why I'm still alive. 1 minute, Chrisen said, checking the radar. The remaining Syndicate ships were still following, 3 of them now moving in coordinated formation. Perfect. Luke made a sharp turn, bringing them around a massive gas cloud. The radar momentarily lost the pursuit ships as they entered the cloud's interference. When they emerged on the other side, Chrisen understood Luke's plan. Ahead of them was a gravity well, one of thousands in the dead zone, but this one was special. According to the chart Luke had open, it was positioned at the exact intersection of 3 different gravitational fields. The result was a zone of chaos, where gravity itself seemed to have multiple opinions about which direction was down. "The shredder," Luke said. "That's what the research team called it. Anything that goes in there gets pulled in 3 different directions at once. The structural stress tears ships apart." "We're going to fly through that?" "No." Luke cut the engines and let their momentum carry them forward. "We're going to fly around it. Very precisely around it. Our friends back there? They don't have the charts. They'll try to follow us, but they won't have the exact coordinates for the safe path." Chrisen watched the radar. The pursuit ships emerged from the gas cloud and immediately accelerated, trying to close the distance. "They're gaining," she said. "Let them." Luke's hands were steady on the controls. "Just a little closer." The Rusty Bucket entered the shredder's outer gravity field. Chrisen felt the pull immediately, multiple forces trying to twist the ship in different directions. Luke was already compensating, using the control stick and manual thrusters to keep them on a precise trajectory that threaded the needle between the competing gravity wells. The first Syndicate ship entered the field. It lasted 3 seconds. The ship's forward section pulled one direction, its stern pulled another. The midsection twisted. There was a flash as the reactor breached, and then nothing but expanding debris. The second ship tried to abort, firing reverse thrusters to back away from the shredder, but the gravity field had already caught it. It tumbled, spinning end over end, and vanished into the dark heart of the well. The third ship simply stopped, maintaining distance, refusing to follow. "Smart, Captain," Luke muttered. "But it doesn't matter. By the time they navigate around the shredder, we'll be gone." He piloted them through the gravity chaos with millimeter precision, every adjustment perfect, every correction timed to the microsecond. The Rusty Bucket groaned and shuddered but held together, its ancient hull proving more resilient than modern smart hulls that tried to adjust their structure and ended up pulling themselves apart. They emerged from the far side of the shredder intact. "Temperature?" Luke asked. Chrisen checked. "Yellow zone, not critical." "Good." Luke altered course, heading deeper into the dead zone. On the radar, the third Syndicate ship had vanished, presumably finding a different route or giving up the chase. They flew in silence for several minutes, the only sound the constant hum and rattle of the rusty bucket's engines. Finally, Crisson spoke, "You saved my life, twice now. Who's counting?" "I am." She turned to look at him. "I was trained to think of people as assets or targets, resources to be used or obstacles to be eliminated. You've treated me as neither." Luke glanced at her, his expression softening. "What have I treated you as?" "A person," Crisson said simply. "Someone worth saving, even when logic said otherwise. Someone worthy of trust, even though I'd tried to kill you." "Well, you're not trying to kill me now, so I figure my judgment was sound." "I don't understand you," she said again, but this time it wasn't a criticism. It was something else, almost admiration. "I'm not that complicated. I haul freight, I fix things, and I try not to be an asshole. Everything else is just improvisation." Luke checked his charts. "We're about 2 hours from the far side of the dead zone. After that, we're in free space. I know a few stations where the syndicate doesn't have much influence. We can lay low, figure out our next move." "Our next move," Crisson repeated. "You're assuming I'm staying." "Are you?" She considered. She could leave, find another employer, another contract, another identity. The syndicate would hunt her, but she was good at disappearing. She could survive. But survival wasn't the same as living. That was the revelation that had struck her in Luke's workshop, watching him work to save her life for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. She'd survived for 16 years. She'd never lived. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she admitted. "The syndicate will have marked me as compromised. Other agencies won't hire an assassin with a termination protocol failure. It suggests weakness. I'm effectively unemployable in my profession." "Good thing I'm not hiring an assassin, then," Luke smiled. "I could use a co-pilot, someone who knows tactics, security, who can watch my back. And who, ideally, won't try to kill me on Tuesdays." "What about other days of the week?" "Negotiable." Despite everything, the trauma, the betrayal, the existential upheaval of having her entire worldview reconstructed, Crisson laughed. It was a rusty, unpracticed sound, but genuine. "I don't know how to be a co-pilot," she said. "I'll teach you. Fair warning, the first lesson is learning how to hit things with a wrench until they work properly. That's not proper maintenance protocol." "It's traditional maintenance protocol. There's a difference." They flew on, deeper into the dead zone. Crisson watched the navigation charts, learning the patterns Luke was following, beginning to understand the intuitive logic behind his seemingly random course corrections. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a while. "Sure." "When you found me dying, when you dragged me to your workshop, did you know you could save me? Or were you just guessing?" Luke was quiet for a moment. "I had no idea if it would work. The chemistry was sound, but biology isn't my specialty. For all I knew, the solvent would have just killed you faster." "Then why?" "Because the alternative was watching someone die and not even trying." He met her eyes. "I've seen a lot of people give up, on themselves, on others, on the idea that anything matters. I can't do that. Even when the odds are shit and the plan is terrible, I'd rather try and fail than not try at all." "That's profoundly illogical." "Yep. But it's also," Crisson searched for the word, "noble." "I wouldn't go that far. It's just stubborn." But Crisson had spent 16 years in a profession that prized ruthless efficiency above all else, and she recognized something extraordinary when she saw it. Luke wasn't noble in any traditional sense. He wasn't a hero, wasn't particularly brave, wasn't fighting for any grand cause. He was just a man who refused to let the universe make him cruel. That, Crisson realized, was its own form of heroism. "The syndicate won't stop hunting us," she said. "You understand that? They'll chase us across every system, pull every resource. The navigation data you have is too valuable." "I know. We'll spend the rest of our lives running." "Probably." "And you're okay with that?" Luke shrugged. "I've been running for 3 years already. At least now I'll have company." Crisson looked out at the dead zone, at the chaos and beauty, the danger and possibility. For the first time in her life, she wasn't following orders, wasn't executing a contract, wasn't being aimed at a target by someone else's hand. She was choosing, freely, consciously, choosing. "Okay," she said, "teach me how to be a co-pilot." Luke's grin was infectious. "Lesson 1, see that gauge with the needle? That's the engine temperature. When it hits red, You hit the engine with this wrench. He handed her a large, well-worn wrench. Hit it right there, on the left manifold. Not too hard, or you'll crack the housing. This is absurd. This is the rusty bucket. Absurdity is our primary operating principle. Chryson took the wrench. Its weight was comforting in her hand, not a weapon, but a tool, a choice to build instead of destroy. Where do we go after the dead zone? She asked. I know a station called Haven's Rest. Neutral territory, independent administration. We can resupply there, maybe find some work. Legitimate work, he added, glancing at her. Freight hauling, courier services, that sort of thing. That sounds boring. Boring is underrated. I've had enough excitement to last a lifetime. They flew in companionable silence for a while, the rusty bucket rattling along through the cosmos. Chryson found herself relaxing in a way she never had before, not the forced calm of assassin training, but genuine peace. Luke, she said eventually. Yeah? Thank you. For everything. He smiled. You're welcome. Now watch that gauge. I think we're due for a therapeutic wrench application. The needle was indeed creeping toward red. Chryson stood, wrench in hand, and made her way to the engine compartment. She found the left manifold marked with oil stains and dented from previous applications of wrench-based therapy and gave it a solid thwack. The engine's whine smoothed out, the needle dropped back to yellow. It worked, she called back to the cockpit. Told you, you're a natural. Chryson returned to the co-pilot's seat, still holding the wrench. It felt right somehow, this crude, simple tool that solved problems through direct application of force, just like Luke solved problems through stubborn persistence and refusing to accept that things were impossible. I think I'm going to like it here, she said. On the ship or on the run? Both. Luke laughed. Welcome aboard, co-pilot. Try not to shoot me in my sleep. I make no promises. They flew on into the heart of the dead zone, two people who had every reason to be enemies, becoming something else entirely. Not friends, not yet, but partners. Survivors. A crew of two aboard a ship held together by spite and spot welds, heading toward an uncertain future with nothing but primitive technology and faith in each other. Behind them, the Syndicate's pursuit had faltered. Ahead, the dead zone's far edge beckoned. And for the first time in 16 years, Chryson felt something she'd never expected to feel. Hope. They emerged from the dead zone 6 hours later, the rusty bucket battered but intact. The transition from the nebula's chaos to open space was jarring, like stepping from a hurricane into a quiet room. The silence felt wrong after hours of constant rattling and alarms. We made it, Chryson said, and was surprised by the relief in her voice. Never doubted it, Luke was lying. She could see it in the way his hands relaxed on the controls, the tension draining from his shoulders. He'd been as uncertain as she was. The space beyond the dead zone was relatively empty, a few scattered asteroids, some automated cargo drones following pre-programmed routes, but nothing threatening. Luke set a course for Haven's Rest and engaged what he optimistically called autopilot, which appeared to consist of jamming the control stick in place with a piece of wood. That can't be safe, Chryson observed. It's been working for 15 years. If it ain't broke. He stood and stretched, his spine popping audibly. Come on. I need to check the engine damage, and you need to learn what a proper post-flight inspection looks like. The engine compartment was a maze of pipes, cables, and components that looked like they'd been salvaged from a dozen different ship types. Luke moved through it with the confidence of long familiarity, checking connections, tightening bolts, and occasionally hitting something with a hammer for reasons Chryson couldn't determine. This is your post-flight inspection? She asked. Just hitting things? Percussive maintenance is a time-honored tradition. Luke tapped a pressure gauge and frowned at the reading. But yeah, mostly I'm checking for anything that's loose, leaking, or about to explode. The bucket talks to you if you listen. That rattle we had at hour 4? That was the starboard stabilizer mounting coming loose. I'll need to re-weld it before we make any hard maneuvers. Chryson found herself fascinated despite her training's insistence that this was inefficient. How do you know what the different sounds mean? Experience. 20 years of keeping her flying, he patted the bulkhead affectionately. She's got personality. You'll learn to recognize it. As Luke worked, Chryson noticed something she'd missed during the flight the ship was decorated. Small things, easy to overlook. A faded photograph bolted to one bulkhead showing Luke and another man, both younger, both smiling. A collection of patches from different stations and planets welded to the ceiling. a set of coordinates etched into the metal near the main hatch. "Those coordinates," she said, pointing, "are those Earth?" Luke finished. "Sol system, humanity's homeworld. I've never been. It's restricted space now, mostly a museum system, but I like knowing the numbers. Reminds me where I came from." Chrisan understood that sentiment in a way she hadn't expected. She'd never known where she came from. The Zixili homeworld was just a designation in her file, not a place with meaning. She'd been recruited so young that she had no memory of home, no coordinates etched in her heart. "Tell me about him," she said, gesturing to the photograph. Luke paused in his work. "That's Marcus. He was the co-pilot I mentioned, the one who—" He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. "I'm sorry." "Yeah, me too." Luke returned to his inspection, but his movements were slower now, more thoughtful. "He was a good kid, believed in people, you know? Even when they didn't deserve it. Used to drive me crazy how trusting he was. Then he died because he trusted the wrong corporation." "Is that why you don't use smart tech? Because it killed him?" "Partly." Luke tightened a bolt with more force than necessary. "But also because I realized something after he died. All this advanced technology, all these systems designed to make life easier and safer, they also make it easier to control people, to track them, to shut them down when they're not useful anymore." He looked at her. "Your termination protocol, that's what I'm talking about. Some executive somewhere pressed a button and you were supposed to just die. Clean, efficient, inhuman. But I survived." "You survived because I don't trust the systems, because I use tech so old that the modern stuff can't interface with it." He smiled grimly. "Turns out being a dinosaur has its advantages." They finished the inspection in silence. Luke declared the ship functional, if not exactly healthy, and they returned to the cockpit. Haven's Rest was still 6 hours away at their current speed. "Tell me about Haven's Rest," Chrisan said, settling into the co-pilot's seat. "Why is it safe?" "It's not syndicate-controlled, which makes it safer than most places. Independent administration, governed by a council of the founding families. They make their money from docking fees and trade commissions, so they don't care who you are as long as you pay your bills and don't cause trouble." Luke pulled out his tablet and showed her a map. "It's also positioned at the intersection of 3 trade routes, which means there's always traffic. Easy to disappear in a crowd." "And the syndicate respects their independence?" "More like they haven't bothered to conquer it yet. Haven's Rest doesn't have anything they want badly enough to justify the cost of taking it. The dead zone route changes that math, though. Once word gets out that there's a reliable passage through the nebula." "They'll come for the coordinates," Chrisan finished. "Which means they'll come for you." "Eventually, yeah. But I've been dancing this dance for 3 years now. I know how to stay ahead of them." "Except you can't dance forever. Eventually you'll miss a step." Luke was quiet for a moment. "You're right, which is why I need to find someone I can trust to have these coordinates, someone who'll use them to help people, not control them." "That's a high bar." "Yeah, well, I'm stubborn about standards." Chrisan studied him, this strange human who flew an ancient ship through impossible space, who saved enemies for no logical reason, who carried the weight of knowledge that could change the balance of power in the galaxy and refused to sell it. He was, by every metric of her training, inefficient and illogical. He was also, she realized, the first genuinely good person she'd ever met. "I'll help you," she said. Luke looked at her, surprised. "Help me how?" "Find someone worthy of the coordinates. Protect you while you search. I was trained as an assassin, but those skills translate infiltration, intelligence gathering, threat assessment. I can keep you alive long enough to complete your mission." "That's assuming I have a mission beyond don't die." "You do. You just haven't admitted it to yourself yet." Chrisan leaned forward. "You want to give those coordinates to someone who'll democratize them. Make the dead zone passage available to everyone, not just corporate interests. That's why you haven't sold them, not because you couldn't find a buyer, but because you're looking for the right recipient." Luke blinked. "That's uncomfortably accurate. I'm trained to read people. It's my profession." "Former profession," he corrected. "Former profession," she agreed. "Now I'm a co-pilot, who occasionally does tactical analysis, and maybe some protection work, purely as a side project." Luke laughed, that same genuine sound she'd heard in the workshop. "Okay, co-pilot, who does tactical analysis and protection work. What's your assessment of our current situation?" Chrisan slipped into analysis mode, her training crystallizing the chaos into clear strategic points. The syndicate knows you survived the dead zone. They'll assume you're heading for an independent station. Haven's Rest is the obvious choice. They'll have assets there within 24 hours of our arrival. We need to establish a cover identity, vary our patterns, and avoid any behavior that matches your profile. I have a profile? Everyone has a profile. Yours says you prefer low-tech solutions, avoid corporate facilities, and tend to dock at outer ring berths where security is lighter. So we do the opposite: dock at a premium berth, use the automated systems, act like we belong in corporate space. That's going to cost a fortune in docking fees. But it'll keep us alive. Sometimes the most expensive option is the cheapest in the long run. Luke considered this. You know, I think I'm starting to like having a co-pilot who thinks like an assassin. Former assassin. Right, former, my mistake. They spent the next few hours planning their approach to Haven's Rest. Crisson outlined a strategy that inverted Luke's usual patterns while maintaining enough authenticity that they wouldn't trigger anomaly detection. Luke contributed his knowledge of the station's layout and the local power dynamics. It was, Crisson realized, the first time she'd ever collaborated with someone rather than simply taking orders. The experience was disorienting, but not unpleasant. "Can I ask you something personal?" Luke said as they finalized their plans. "You saved my life twice. I think you've earned personal questions. The bioluminescent marks, the cracks, are those permanent?" Crisson touched her face reflexively. She'd almost forgotten about them during the chaos of the escape. "I don't know. They're a side effect of the necrovile toxin. The medical literature says they usually fade, but sometimes they're permanent." "Do they hurt?" "Not anymore. The solvent flush neutralized the active toxin. These are just residue, scars essentially." "They're not scars," Luke said. "They're proof you survived. That's different." Crisson looked at him. "You have an unusual perspective on scars." "I've got plenty of my own. Each one tells a story." He gestured to a thin line on his forearm. "That's from a cargo accident on Kepler Station. This one, a burn mark on his hand, is from the first time I tried to repair a plasma conduit without shutting it down first. And this," he tapped his chest, where a shirt covered what Crisson assumed was another scar, "is from the day Marcus died. Piece of shrapnel when I was trying to cut him out of the compliance chip's circuitry." "You tried to remove it?" "For 3 hours. Didn't work. The chip was integrated too deeply, and I didn't have the right tools. All I managed to do was make his last hours more painful." Luke's voice was flat, but Crisson could hear the guilt beneath it. "That's my most recent scar, the one that still hurts." "It wasn't your fault." "I know. Doesn't make it hurt less." They sat in silence, two scarred people in a scarred ship, heading toward an uncertain future. Outside the viewport, the stars wheeled slowly, indifferent to human struggles. "Luke," Crisson said after a while. "Yeah? Thank you for not giving up on me, even when it would have been logical to do so. Thank you for not killing me when you woke up, even though it would have been tactically sound to eliminate a potential threat. We're both very good at making irrational decisions. It's our best quality." Crisson smiled, that still new expression that felt strange but right on her face. "Then I think we'll work well together." "Yeah," Luke agreed. "I think we will." Haven's Rest materialized from the darkness like a promise kept. The station was a far cry from Ethelgard's neon chaos. Instead of garish advertisements and corporate logos, Haven's Rest was adorned with gardens. Actual gardens, grown in rotating habitat rings that spun gently to create artificial gravity. From a distance, the station looked like a flower blooming in the void. "It's beautiful," Crisson said, genuinely surprised. The founding families were colonists from Earth's agricultural regions. They believed that humans, and by extension, all species, needed green-growing things to stay sane in space. Luke began their docking approach, heading for a premium berth as Crisson had suggested. "It's impractical as hell, but it makes the place feel alive." They docked without incident, the rusty bucket looking absurdly out of place among the sleek corporate vessels in the premium section. Luke paid the exorbitant docking fee without flinching, using an account Crisson suspected he'd prepared specifically for situations like this. "First rule of running," he explained as they prepared to disembark, "always have multiple identities, multiple accounts, multiple backup plans. I've got 5 different names I can operate under, each with its own financial history and documentation. That's actually sound tradecraft, Chrisan admitted. Told you I wasn't completely incompetent. They'd changed clothes before landing. Luke had traded his grease-stained flight jacket for a cleaner corporate casual outfit that made him look like a mid-level executive. Chrisan wore civilian clothing for the first time in years, simple, practical, but without the tactical implications of her usual gear. She'd kept her polymer armor underneath, though. Some habits were hard to break. Haven's Rest was everything Aethelgard wasn't: clean, quiet, organized without being oppressive. People moved through the corridors at a relaxed pace, and the air smelled faintly of growing things: herbs, flowers, oxygen-producing plants. It was the most human place Chrisan had ever been, despite the fact that humans were a minority among the station's inhabitants. First stop. Information, Luke said, leading them toward what his map labeled as the Garden of Whispers, a bar and meeting place in one of the rotating habitat rings. The garden lived up to its name. Plants hung from every available surface, their leaves creating a green canopy over tables where beings from a dozen species sat in conversation. The lighting was soft, natural spectrum, designed to mimic evening sunlight. A fountain bubbled in the center, actual water cycling through actual pipes, a luxury most stations couldn't afford. Luke ordered drinks at the bar, something local called Green Twilight for him, water for Chrisan, and they found a corner table with good sightlines to the exits. Now what? Chrisan asked. Now we listen. Luke sipped his drink and grimaced slightly. And we wait. Information flows through places like this. Give it an hour, and we'll know if the syndicate has people here already. Chrisan's training made her want to actively investigate, but she recognized the wisdom in Luke's approach, so she settled back and observed. The garden's clientele was mixed merchants, crew members on leave, a few who were clearly station residents. The conversations were subdued but animated, people sharing news and gossip with the easy familiarity of regular patrons. Chrisan found herself cataloging details automatically. The merchant in the corner who glanced at the door every time someone entered, the pair of humans in matching jackets who sat too alertly to be off duty, the Zixili, her own species, sitting alone near the fountain, nursing a drink and radiating isolation. That last one caught her attention. Zixili weren't common this far from home space. Seeing another one here was statistically improbable. Don't, Luke said quietly. Don't, what? Don't approach your fellow Zixili. Could be legitimate, could be bait. Either way, it's a complication we don't need. He was right, but Chrisan felt a pull nonetheless. She'd spent 16 years surrounded by other species, always the lone Zixili in any operational theater. Seeing someone from her homeworld stirred something she'd thought long, suppressed a sense of belonging, of shared origin. She stayed seated. 40 minutes later, new patrons entered the garden, 3 of them, wearing the subtle but distinctive insignia of Vane Syndicate security. They weren't hiding their affiliation, which meant they wanted people to know they were here. That's our answer, Luke muttered. They're already in place. Chrisan analyzed the security team with professional interest. They were competent but not exceptional, probably second-tier assets, sent to watch and report rather than engage. Their body language suggested they were searching for someone, but without a specific target in mind. They didn't know what Luke looked like in civilian clothes then. Good. One of them pulled out a tablet and began showing images to the bartender. Chrisan couldn't see the screen, but she could guess what it showed Luke's face, probably from station security footage at Aethelgard. The bartender looked at the image, shook his head, and went back to mixing drinks. Either he genuinely didn't recognize Luke, or he was smart enough to play ignorant when Syndicate security came calling. Haven's Rest didn't maintain its independence by cooperating with corporate enforcers. Time to leave, Luke said, standing casually. Slow, natural, like we've been here all along and we're done now. They exited through a side door that led to one of the station's agricultural rings. The sudden transition from bar to garden was disorienting rows of vegetables growing under artificial sunlight, the air thick with moisture and the smell of soil. This way. Luke led them through the garden rows, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this before. They emerged in a different section of the station entirely, far from the premium docking berths. Where are we going? Chrisan asked. To see an old friend, someone who can help us establish cover identities that'll hold up to syndicate scrutiny. The old friend turned out to be a human woman operating out of a workshop in the station's industrial sector. The sign above her door read, Fisk's Custom Fabrication, but the interior suggested she fabricated more than just parts. Luke Anderson, the woman said when they entered. She was older than Luke, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of scars that suggested a colorful past. I heard you were dead. I get that a lot, Luke replied. How's business, Fisk? Booming. Everyone needs something these days. She looked at Kristen with sharp, assessing eyes. Who's your friend? This is Vera, Luke said, using the cover name they'd agreed upon. She's my new co-pilot. Vera, this is Fisk. She's the best identity artist in 3 sectors. Identity artist, Fisk repeated with a wry smile. That's a polite way of saying forger. I like it. She gestured them deeper into the workshop. What do you need? 2 clean identities. Something that'll stand up to corporate background checks, preferably with enough history that we look legitimate. That's not cheap. I'm aware. Luke pulled out a credit chip. This enough? Fisk took the chip, scanned it, and whistled. That'll do. Give me 3 hours. I'll need biometric scans from both of you. The scanning process was thorough retinal prints, fingerprints, DNA sampling, voice patterns. Fisk worked with the efficiency of long practice, her equipment a mix of high-tech scanners and old-fashioned photography. You're Zixili, she said to Chrison during the scanning. Don't see many of your people out here. I prefer to work independently, Chrison said carefully. Smart. The corporate life doesn't suit everyone. Fisk adjusted her scanner. I'm going to mark you down as a cargo specialist. That's vague enough to be flexible, common enough to not raise questions. That work for you? Yes. 3 hours later, they had new identities. Chrisen was now Vera Thane, cargo specialist with 7 years of documented experience across multiple stations. Luke was Michael Ross, independent freight captain. The identity artist handed over the final data slug with a sharp nod. Good luck, Michael. Vera, you're going to need it. With a spotty record that looks this authentic, we might just make it. Luke finished his thought, pocketing the chips. He glanced at Chrisanne now, Vera. She looked different in the utilitarian jumpsuit, the glow of her skin dimmed to a dull simmer beneath the fabric. They moved through the shadows of the station's lower levels toward Docking Bay 23. Chrisanne felt the strange, heavy thrum of the human's cocktail still coursing through her veins. Luke hadn't just saved her life. He had scrubbed the Syndicate's termination protocol with engine degreaser and a bypass pump. He'd treated her like a machine that needed fixing, yet looked at her like a soul that deserved saving. Wait, Chrisanne whispered, her hand snapping to the hilt of a concealed blade. Her neural implant was offline, but her instincts remained razor-sharp. Someone is at the bay. 4 signatures. Heavy ordnance. Luke didn't reach for a laser or a scanner. He pulled out a small, weighted string with a brass plum at the end. He lowered it near a vent. The string didn't move, but Luke frowned. The air scrubbers are off. They're waiting for us to cycle the airlock so they can flood the bay with neurogas. How do you know that? Chrisanne asked, stunned. Old freighter trick. If the vent isn't pulling, someone's blocked the intake to build up pressure elsewhere, Luke muttered. He didn't look scared, he looked annoyed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manual flare. Standard Syndicate cleanup crew. They think we're still playing by their grid rules. They're tracking your old biometric signature, Vera. They don't realize you're officially dead. He handed her a heavy iron wrench. When I pop this flare into the intake, the back pressure is going to blow the hatch. They'll be looking for a firefight. Give 'em a physical headache instead. Luke ignited the magnesium flare and jammed it into the manual override. A second later, a muffled thud echoed through the pipes. The docking bay doors didn't slide open elegantly. They buckled outward under the sudden thermal expansion. The recovery team 4 masked enforcers were tossed back by the pressure wave. Chrisanne moved before the smoke cleared. Without her HUD, she relied on the raw physics of her Zixili physiology. She was a blur of violet motion, using the wrench not with the finesse of an assassin, but with the brutal efficiency of a mechanic. Within seconds, the enforcers were down, incapacitated by the very primitive tools they had likely never seen used as weapons. Luke stepped over the fallen men, heading straight for the rusty bucket. Hurry, the station security will be here in 5. They scrambled up the ramp. Inside, the ship smelled of ozone, old coffee, and oil. It was messy, tactile, and completely devoid of the sterile corporate aesthetics Chrisanne had known her entire life. As the engines began to roar, a deep, vibrating growl that Chrisanne felt in her bones, she paused in the cockpit. She looked at the medical kit Luke had left on the co-pilot's seat. It contained a manual needle, a roll of gauze, and the empty bottle of the stimulant he'd used to restart her heart. She remembered waking up in his workshop. She had expected to find herself in a cage or on a dissecting table. Instead, she'd found Luke sitting on a milk crate, falling asleep while holding a wet cloth to her fevered brow. He hadn't asked for the navigation data. He hadn't asked for a ransom. He had simply sewn her skin back together because, as he put it, his eyes said she was a person. The realization hit her with the force of a supernova. For 20 cycles, she had been a ghost, a tool, a variable in a ledger. To the Syndicate, she was a depreciating asset. To Luke, she was a life worth the risk of a sector-wide manhunt. A single, hot drop of moisture rolled down her purple cheek. It burned more than the toxin ever had. Luke looked up from the navigation console, his hands hovering over the analog throttle. He saw the tear and stopped. "Hey, we're almost out. The dead zone is only 10 minutes away. They can't follow us there." "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I was sent to kill you. I am a weapon, Luke. Why did you look at me and see a person?" Luke wiped a smudge of grease from his forehead, leaving a dark streak. He gave her a small, lopsided smile, the smile of a man who trusted gears over ghosts. Because tools don't ask why, Vera, only people do. He patted the seat next to him. "Now, sit down and help me fly this bucket. I'm a great captain, but I'm a terrible navigator. And I think it's time we both started working for ourselves." Krisan sat. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cold, solid metal of the control panel. She didn't link her mind to the ship, she simply took the physical wheel. As the rusty bucket punched through the station's atmosphere and dived into the shimmering, chaotic clouds of the dead zone, the ghost of Sector 7 vanished forever. In her place sat a co-pilot, watching the stars through a reinforced glass window, finally realizing that the most powerful tech in the galaxy couldn't compare to a little bit of human grease and a whole lot of heart.
And that brings us to the end of today's story. Thanks for taking the time to listen. I really appreciate it. This channel is all about original human-focused science fiction, and every story is presented as a part of a larger collection. If you'd like to continue, there's another story from this channel on screen now that fits right alongside this one. Feel free to jump into that next, and I'll see you there.